Did all you lovely people have a good stretch ready to finish up this module on the ethics of care? Yeah, so far, look, we've seen these two ideas about moral development, Lawrence Kohlberg's analysis, which culminates in this idea of an ethics of justice, and then Carol Gilligan's analysis, which culminates then in an ethics of care. And, just to review again one last time, the ethics of justice here, this is what holds that morality is understood primarily in terms of rules that specify obligations and rights, and that we order these obligations and rights by their relative importance when they conflict. That's the ethics of justice. Meanwhile, we have then an ethics of care. What does the ethics of care say? Well, let's remind you, we see this a lot now. An ethics of care has these three elements. 1, maintaining personal relationships. 2, kindness and beneficence. And 3, sensitivity to one's own needs and the special needs of others. And now when looking at these two different accounts, we have seen that Jean Grimshaw, now she does not like seeing one perspective, the justice perspective, as masculine and labeling the other perspective, the ethics of care, as feminine, right? Again, she thinks that calling an ethics of care a feminist ethics, Grimshaw thinks that is incoherent, since, of course, plenty of men will endorse it while plenty of women will not. And Grimshaw also thinks that calling an ethics of care a female or feminine ethics is dangerous because that can be used to coerce women into certain roles and also coerce men away from those roles as well. And so what might we then conclude about this ethics of care? Because I want to be positive. I think there's something very valuable going on here. And I think Grimshaw does to a certain extent as well. Because it does seem to offer, this is the valuable thing, I think this is the insight, it does seem to offer a perspective of ethics that seems to be ignored in utilitarianism and Kantian deontology. Again, these emphasis on rules, principle of utility, formula of universal law, formula of humanity, all these things, look, those seem valuable, but also it seems valuable that we have special relationships with people that we have to also care about. And I think the best way to kind of understand this is seeing how ethics of care may give us a complete picture about what morality will look like. I think Kantianism and utilitarianism might give us a good picture, but an incomplete picture. And ethics of care might be very valuable in supplementing that and perhaps even perfecting that idea of what morality is about. And to illustrate this idea, I'll pick a slightly different example, but I'll connect it together. So I want to use an example from the study of negotiation and conflict resolution. Because most people, when they think about negotiation or conflict resolution, have a very specific image that pops in their mind when I ask students, well, how do you think negotiation and conflict resolution work? Now, most people think something very competitive, maybe even violent, or, at the very least, a tug of war or a battle where each person is trying to get what they want at the expense of the other person. So when confronted with a conflict, we tend to see a picture here that involves an inherent tension between being assertive, fighting for your rights, contending to get what you want. And by the way, that seems consistent with the justice perspective. Fight for what's right, be assertive for what's right. If it's justice, then you got to contend and fight for it. Meanwhile, empathy seems to pull in the opposite direction, where you just yield and give the person what they want. This might look like the caring approach with its emphasis on sacrifice for the other person, to preserve the relationship, perhaps. Now, I will just note, I've taught negotiation and conflict resolution for a long time, and I personally have not seen much gender differences here, because a lot of people like to assume that, it must be the men must be the ones that are very assertive and contentious and competitive, where the women in my class must be the students who are more empathetic. They tend to yield and, give the other side whatever it is they want in negotiation. And I will tell you, I don't see that. I don't, because the women in my class can be just as competitive. I mean, they're not all competitive, but not all of the men for that matter. But yeah, a lot of men can definitely be contentious and competitive. But I've seen plenty of men who are also very sensitive to relationships and yield. Indeed, tons of my males, maybe sometimes more of my male students are ones who tend to be pretty sensitive to the relationship and yield. Whereas the women in the class often can be the most contentious. And I tell you what, especially when there's a woman negotiating on behalf of someone they care about, holy cow, that person is so assertive when negotiating on behalf of someone else. Wow. But again, of course, women can also be empathetic and yield. I just don't see any. I've never seen a general pattern based on gender there, even though a lot of people like to assume there is one. It goes in all different directions. Anyhow, back to this understanding about conflict. Now, studies show that if this is your approach to conflict, where you're either being assertive or you're being empathetic, there's lots of study after study show this approach is not very good for conflict resolution. And there's way too many approaches. I can't even list them all here. I'll just say that studies suggest that when you approach conflict like this as a trade-off between being empathetic and being assertive, this actually tends to create bad outcomes for everyone involved. Take the course, we'll talk about why. But I guess, trust me, I don't know what to say. But that's why when I teach negotiation, however, I teach a very different approach to negotiation and conflict resolution, because I emphasize an approach that sees conflict resolution as an opportunity for joint problem solving. It's not an opportunity for armed conflict and contention. It's an opportunity for joint problem solving, which requires cooperation and very effective forms of communication. And indeed, the best approach to conflict resolution is like what that 11-year-old Amy said when she was really concerned about these people talking things out, talking out their differences and finding a way to work together. And that is the approach I teach when I teach conflict and dispute resolution, because this approach is trying to integrate, here you can see, we've seen pictures like this a lot in this class. I'm trying to integrate both assertiveness and empathy together. It is possible to, be assertive with your interests, but also care about the interests of the other person. And there's no reason that these have to be opposites. It is actually possible to do both quite effectively. And studies show, by the way, when you negotiate this way with these dual concerns for yourself and the other, is that we tend to get better outcomes for everyone involved. I have to, you just kind of trust me on this. I wish I take the course, I prove it, I guess, or I show it, I guess, in class. But I will say this, there is a reason why when I teach that approach, it takes the whole semester, because yes, this approach is not easy. It is difficult. In some ways, it goes against all of our instincts to be both empathetic and assertive, but it is absolutely possible. And when done well, you absolutely get agreements that are better for everyone involved. But like I said, it takes the whole semester just to get that started, and then probably the rest of your life to get good at it. I'm still working. I don't claim to be an expert, but I do know that that is the path I seek to follow. Anyhow, long story there. Let's getting back to these two moral perspectives. Again, these two perspectives from Lawrence Kohlberg and Carol Gilligan. And as I mentioned already from the beginning, the challenge is, how do we integrate these two together? How can we retain an impartial concern for justice while also caring about those closest to us? And to be honest, that is a lot where a lot of morality is right now today. That a lot of philosophers are out there working, trying to figure out how to integrate all these together, because I don't think anyone's completely figured it out yet. I think a lot of people realize this is what morality needs to do. It needs to figure out how to integrate impartiality with special concern. And there's a lot of different approaches that do it, far more than we could ever cover in this simple introductory class. However, there is one person that some people do look for help on this, and that is the philosopher Aristotle. Ooh, going way back now, because Aristotle has this notion of what some people call virtue ethics. I will call this an ethics of excellence. I'll explain that when we get there. But this ethics of excellence tries to look at the whole person, both our emotional and our rational parts, and tries to figure out how these both can come together and to create a flourishing life for yourself. A flourishing life will involve excellence with respect to our emotion and excellence with respect to our mind and our intellect and our reason. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself there, because that's the subject that we'll start talking about in the next module. For now, though, hey, I hurt my back a little bit there. Ooh, okay, that's interesting. Well, then it's really good to remove that arm flap, right? Pat yourself on the back. You guys are so close to being done. You guys, I'm so proud of you all, man. I'm happy for you guys. We're almost done. So anyway, you're almost done with another module, so you know what to do. Take the module quiz. Get some tweets in. Some of you are forgetting to tweet. Don't forget to tweet. Tweet me if you want to talk with me. Or is that too weird. Yeah, I like talking to you all. Whatever. Tweet. And then when you're ready, we can finally dive into Aristotle. But hey, until then, you know what to do. Take care. Stay safe.